We're on our way to Birdsville, a place made famous by the film Back of Beyond, starring one Tom Cruise. And no, he doesn't look a thing like the fella from Hollywood. The film centred on Tom, who at the time drove the world's longest mail run. Back then, the Birdsville track was as rough as guts, with big sandblows blocking the way. Nowadays though, the Birdsville track is a relatively easy but remote drive. The famous track skirts through the junction of three deserts, the Tyre, the Strzelecki and Sturt's Stony Desert. There's one place that you really have to go. The famous Birdsville Pub. Its big, cool stone walls and cold beers will quench the thirst of the weariest traveller. And while you're there, you might like to try the famous Birdsville Pub 7-course meal, made up of a pie and a six-pack. Someone who drags more dead four-wheel drives out of the Simpson Desert than anyone is Theo Nell from Birdsville Auto Centre. During the peak season, Theo will recover anything up to 12 vehicles a month from the desert, at an average of $2,000 a throw. Running the local recovery service and tyre repair centre for the past 5 years has taught the South African-born Theo some valuable lessons. Lessons he is only too keen to pass on in the interest of outback safety.
The main thing is tyre pressures, being out in the desert, not having to overinflate it.
What sort of tyre pressures do you run, Theo?
Once we're hooked up and we've got a car on, we drop anything down to 8 psi. All depends on the certain time of the year. Obviously, when it's a bit wetter, the sand is more compacted and you can get over the sand dunes much easier. Where after a dry season, at the end of the tourist season, maybe September towards October, all those sand is just basically, it's all just sandy and very loose sand. Yeah. And you've got to have your tyre pressures right down. And like I say, we go down to even 8 psi sometimes. Well, one thing we found with them is somewhere along the line they've got this idea of overinflating tyres.
Yeah.
Now what I say by overinflating, that's anything from 35 up. A lot of people will tell me, no, well that can't be. That's what the tyre man, wherever they come from, recommend, 35, that's it. Now yes, when you sit in a laboratory and you work out heat and friction and whatever, yes, then on an ideal surface, have your tyres pumped hard. But something people don't realize is when you get on the sharp stones, you've got the weight of the car. Now the harder, the more weight you've got on the car, the more actual weight is on the tyre. Now what happens when you pump a tyre really hard, that'll be like 35 up, 40, 45 some people, and you put a lot of weight in the car, a lot of camping gear and fuel, you've got this force from the car down onto the tyre. Now the tyre, once it's really pumped very hard, there's no give in the tyre. Now once you put this load on this tyre, which is really stretched down, now say there's a sharp little stone in the road, which a lot of stones out here, you put the weight on the tyre and the tyre just over the stone, there's no give and it just push right into the tyre.
Yeah.
Now when the people come and you tell them, listen, your mate, your tyres just pumped too hard. They say, well, it can't be, this guy said, and I've been doing it for so many years and this and this and this and that. Now I don't care who says or what any tyre manufacturer or any guy with 100 years of four-wheel drive experience Once you're out on this stony country with the sharp stones, take your tyre pressures down. We want give over the tyre.
Yeah.
So the tyre actually want to roll over the sharp stones. People think, yeah, if you pump them too hard, you can get too soft.
Yeah.
The side walls will bulge and get sidewall damage,
Yes.
which is totally wrong. Same thing. You'll get this give in the sidewall and it just pushes in and just pushes out again.
How much does it cost to pull a vehicle out of the desert? Just roughly. I know that the rates depend on kilometres and things like that, but just
That's
give
right.
us a couple of
Kilometres and
ballpark
distance. Popel's Corner, just west of Popel's Corner, you could look anything up to $4,000 easy.
That's right. So $4,000 to pull a vehicle out, and I've got to say, having seen Theo at work, that it's $4,000 well spent. There's an awful lot of effort goes into getting out there and getting back, but that's the fact, isn't it?
That's right.
So get your tyres down in this sort of country.
Yep,
Good
especially in the
stuff.
stony country, yeah.
Thanks very much, Theo. Terrific.
No worries.
Okay, we've got a bit of a problem here. The other night, around 6 o'clock on dusk, which is when it usually happens, I ploughed into a roo. He was a pretty big fella too, and travelling my way as it happened, and we're doing about 110 kilometres an hour. On a lesser vehicle, it would have caused a hell of a lot of damage. On the old Toyota, all it's done is punch back the bar. Now this isn't such a drama, except we've got a couple of cracks here already. It's happened once before. And of course, if I hit anything else, it's going to possibly go back into the tyre. If it does that, it could lock up the tyre and that could cause some real problems. So what we're going to do here is a bit of a bush fix, using the winch to peel back the bar, give me a little bit of free play for any future accidents, should they happen. Now, given the fact that we've got a couple of thousand kilometres of gravel to go before we get over to the coast, we've got to have a look at this now, I think. Going good, Pat. Great. Whoop. Spot on, mate. Well, now that Pat's pulled the bumper bar back into place, it's looking pretty good, except we've still got the problem of the cracks. Now, this can happen all the time in the bush, vibration, stuff like that. What you need to be able to do is to weld. It's pretty easy, providing you've got a couple of 12-volt batteries and some booster cables, and you just need a couple of other things. Obviously, welding rods is one of them. 12-gauge rods are good because they're finer, just a general purpose rod for most purposes. And I've used the number plate just to make a bit of an extension with some tape and whatnot for an old lens from one of my welding masks at home. So that's the face shield. You'll note that I'm wearing gloves and sunglasses too. Now, there's a reason for that. Any sort of welding's dangerous, but especially when you're welding with batteries, because there is that chance that, you know, you can spark the whole lot up. And in the bush, the last thing you want to do is to be damaged. So obviously a bit of protective gear. Now, the setup here is aimed at getting 24 volts, okay, maximum ampage and 24 volts. So essentially, booster cable positive. I've hooked the negative to the positive across the batteries, and then come out on this side with the other negative. That gives me positive and negative here on the booster cables and 24 volts because it's running through both batteries. What else have we got? Not much. I'm using the booster cable as the hand piece, and of course I've earthed it to the bumper bar as direct as possible. Now, you'll note that when you do this sort of stuff, you want to make it as easy as possible. The reason for that is because you don't want to flatten the batteries. In order to make it easy, I've had this rod sitting up on the turbo, up underneath the bonnet, so it's really nice and warm. Warm rods make all the difference in the world. And the other thing I've done is to take particular care to file away the surface over here, so that it's ready to go. It's nice fresh metal and it'll weld really easily. Is there anything else we need to worry about? Not really, except just remember the old basic, whatever you're welding on, make sure you've disconnected the batteries. In this case, it's not a problem because we've got the batteries out here on the floor. Okay, well, let's give it a go.
Well, we go from one old bus to another. From a vehicle that's been patched up with bush welds to one that's been patched up with bush paint. Wolfgang John is a Birdsville local who is well recognised Australia-wide for his paintings. He's got a gallery and coffee shop in Birdsville that are really worth visiting. But it was his dolled up Land Cruiser that we wanted to talk about.
The truck itself, it's got a bit of an interesting history. It was a Caterpillar service vehicle.
Yeah, you're right there, John. It was found on a dump. He saw it on a dump, the kids were playing in it. And he looked at it and he thought he can do it up. He put a battery in it and started it and drove it away.
They're a tough
Simple
thing,
as that,
aren't they?
yeah. It lasts forever, you know.
Yeah.
Took the top off, made it a convertible, took the doors off. You can see it's got different doors now.
Yep.
And undercoated it with normal house paint with a big roller.
Oh, I like it.
I was totally white. We nearly thought we put a red cross on it, but then we changed our mind. And I went around in a Minka and picked up every bit of color they had, every version, and from acrylics to oil, whatever, and painted in these colors. He lacquered the whole thing.
Oh, it's been lacquered, has it?
It's been lacquered over the colours so it will stay a little bit longer.
Oh, that explains the superb finish. It's done some pretty enormous trips, hasn't it, this truck?
It's been everywhere. It's done some rough tripping through deep water, like over the bonnet, coming up here in the flood, with 3 surfboards on top. And he parked it on top of a hill just outside here, after he'd been up the Birdsville track. And they pedalled across on surfboards. And nobody expected anyone, you know, it's just amazing. The day after I went back by boat with the surfboards, and the water was still running out of the diffs and the CV joints, you know.
How is it for things like brakes? Has it got brakes?
It's got some brakes. It hasn't got a handbrake, but it's got 3 wheels got brakes. One wheel is without a brake, but you don't need this out here, you know.
Yeah.
As long as you know where you want to stop, you know. You can always switch the engine off. You know?
You can plan on it for a while, yeah.
Every good truck needs the winch. I said that before.
Birdsville, gateway to the Simpson Desert, and one of the most fascinating places in the Australian outback. It's a tiny town with a population of about 100 people, but it's got some terrific old buildings around. It's got a fantastic museum, and it's got the pub behind me, built in the 1880s, which is, you know, really one of the icons of Australian folklore, I guess, really. Birdsville was quite a thriving little place last century, especially around the 1880s when the pub was built, because they were still collecting taxes on the cattle that left Queensland and went into South Australia. Federation kind of ruined that and nearly turned Birdsville into a bit of a ghost town. But tourism in recent years has really picked it right up again. It's got good facilities, good camping ground, very expensive petrol, but it's a great place. It really is well worth a visit. It's one of those places where people do come not just to have a look. They also do a lot of drinking, especially in September during the Birdsville races, where they consume anywhere from 30 to 40 tonnes of beer. But we've already done our drinking here, and it's time to head on down the road and have a look at Windora and some of the Gibber country.
We stumbled across this pack of brumbies on the Birdsville Developmental Road, a few k's out of Batuta. These wild horses roam the outback with the seasons, always staying where the pick is greenest and the water close by. They're a welcome surprise. There's not an outback trip that goes by where I don't learn something new about the secrets of the outback, and that's why I keep coming back. Now, as most of you know, travelling on these outback roads requires a whole new level of skills. There really are a few things that you need to look out for, and one of them is corrugations. Now, corrugations and the way that you tackle them basically depends on your vehicle. You need to find a speed that suits your vehicle best so that you just float nicely along the top of those corrugations. Now, in this case, aftermarket suspension, like the Series 2000 that we've got running in this 100 series, really is an advantage. Something else that you need to look out for on these roads is washaways, and whoop, here comes one right now. Now, the problem with washaways is that they really can do some damage to the suspension of your vehicle or your sump. Basically, a washaway is an erosion ditch cut through the centre of the road, and tackle them too fast and you can do some real damage and be stuck in the bush for quite a while. Something else that you need to look out for is road trains. Now, the only real rule with road trains is that they own the road. If you see one off in the distance, just pull over to the left, give them a nice wide berth and let them go past. But I guess in summation, the main thing that you need to think of when you're travelling on these outback dirt roads is that you're having a good holiday and you need to take it easy, because taking it easy will create less problems and you'll have a much happier and safer journey. There's something almost surreal about the vast Gibber plains of Sturt's stony desert. When Sturt travelled through this area in 1844, he described the desert as an immense, gloomy plain. He was, of course, referring to the purple-coloured stones. These stones, or gibbers, get their colour and shine from the iron they contain. It sure is a stark sight.
The Cooper is a wondrous place in the driest land on earth. Compared to other waterways, it is of humble birth. Right now, it's just a trickle. In other times, in flood, it sweeps away the mighty gums on raging waves of mud. But mostly, it's a place of peace, a source of life to all. Because no other water's near, it is a port of call to the nomads of the sky who navigate instinctively. They touch down on the Cooper, heading inland from the sea. They come and go, these nomads, the birds, the beasts and men. But once the Cooper calls to them, they'll all come back again. Banjo saw the Cooper, heard the river on its bars, and was inspired to write his tales of campfires, sparks and stars.
When we go bush at 4-Wheel Drive Monthly, which we do as often as we can, we take along a very simple camp kitchen that I put together years ago when I was tour guiding, and it's so simple and so multi-purpose, and it can feed a lot of people. But most of all, it's got to be tough to last the sort of places we go and the treks we go on. You can't get much more simple than this. It's 2 sheets of 12mm plywood, 1 axis of backboard in this instance. It's got the gas cylinder behind it to keep it away. We've got a couple of Bunsen burners here, the Chinese type, a 2-ring and a 3-ring. The sort of thing you see at your local disposal store and often wonder what it's there for. They're so simple to use, these things, and they're very rugged and very tough. Things don't break on them, basically, and that's what you want in a good bush kitchen, in a 4-wheel drive kitchen especially. Now, the milk crates underneath are not only supporting it, they also double as the method of packing and carrying the stuff too. As far as implements go, you don't need a lot to do a good job. A big camp pot any day is terrific, a big cast iron pot, because you can use it for everything from cooking a stew or roasting a meal or just frying a couple of eggs on the bottom to boiling up the water afterwards to wash the dishes. Cooking gear, well, of course, we're travelling in 4-wheel drives, we're going up rough roads. There's no point having stuff that's going to bust. Stainless steel has proven to be the best, even when it gets really grungy. You know, it just takes a handful of sand and a bit of a river and you've got it back to new again. Of course, the billy, you've got to have a billy. This one has been around for quite a while. It's made some pretty memorable cups of tea in all sorts of places. Apart from that, a bag full of bowls and plates and away you go. But the whole key to keeping this simple is that it's very easy to pack and very reliable. And of course the boards double for all sorts of things, like a jacking plate. You can put the 2 of them together, give yourself a jacking plate on soft ground. You can use them underneath the tyres on sandhills and things like that when you need to get out of a bog, or you can even lie them down in the middle of the day and have a bit of a snooze on them. But best of all, it's cheap. So there you have it. For a couple of $100 maximum, and that's if you bought it all new, you've got a camp kitchen you can take anywhere for forever, really. Multi-purpose, it's a great thing. And it's tough, really tough. And here at 4-Wheel Drive Monthly, that's what we need, because we're about to chuck this in the truck and go and belt up some really rugged roads. But that's what it's all about, isn't it?
crossings can be tricky business indeed. In fact, a lot of driver trainers actually say avoid water at all costs. But at 4 Wheel Drive Monthly, we kind of like wetting our feet because it can be a heap of fun. Now, there are a number of precautions that you need to take if you do decide that you want to cross that river. One of the first is to have someone experienced walk the river. Now, when they're walking the river, they need to assess the depth of the water, and they also need to assess what is actually on the bottom of the creek. Now, in our case, Roothy came back to me and he said, Pat, there's sand and there's rock on the bottom. So on that decision, we decided to lower the tyre pressures of the 4-wheel drive to about 15 psi. Now that meant that it would be more tractable over that surface of sand and rock. Something else that you need to take into account is to always lock the vehicle into low range. Low range second gear is what we used here, and that enables the vehicle to have enough torque to actually create a bow wave in front of the vehicle. Now, a bow wave basically means that there's an air pocket just in front of the engine that stops your electricals getting wet, because if you get wet alternators and batteries, you're going to probably stop midstream. Something else that you need to take into account is one of these things. We wouldn't have attempted that crossing there if it wasn't for our AirTech snorkel on this TJM 100 series Land Cruiser. Now, snorkels suck the air in up here out of harm's way. If you get water into your engine, basically it can hydraulic and you're up for a pretty expensive rebuild. Now, the AirTech snorkel is pretty unique in the fact that it tucks up right here above the windscreen. So the air rushes up here off the windscreen and rams in here. Now, that actual ram effect, not so much on a slow water crossing, but on the highway, can actually, some people say, give you a few more kilowatts of power out on the highway. Above all, with water crossings, I need to stress that you have to be comfortable with your own ability. If you're not comfortable when you're first entering that water, then don't do it. Otherwise, you could have a very expensive mistake on your hands.
This morning, while I was checking out the truck for little problems, as I tend to do every morning, I noticed that the finer filter sticker had shifted around a bit. Now, I've been watching it vibrate. The Donaldson sitting on the mudguard's a great setup, but it does vibrate. Anything that's, the further it is away from the centre of the vehicle, the more it's going to vibrate. That's the way vibration works. So it's been shaking around a fair bit. That's okay. That's not such a drama until it starts to break things. But I noticed then, when I took the cap off, that the bolt had come undone. Now, when the bolt comes undone, that allows the filter to come out a little bit, which means the filter's not working properly. So that becomes a bit of a drama. It's letting raw dust in through the back. Now, I've gone to great pains to fit good filters. I don't want that happening. But then, this is the way vibration works. It very rarely stops at one point. When one thing comes loose, the next thing down the line goes loose, or something goes wrong. So as soon as I knew I had a bit of a problem here, I traced it back, and sure enough, where the rubber hose goes through the quarter panel, a hole that I cut and trimmed myself, so I can't complain about it, it's gone and worn itself a hole through too. So we've got potential for dust to come in here through this hose too. Knowing that vibration's happening here and it's caused damage here and here, the next thing to look at was this, and look at this. This bolt is actually sitting in and it looks as if it's working, but it's not. It's beveled the thread out because as one thing led to another, the vibration's shaken this, it's loosened the top bolt, and at the same time I've realised that the clamp that should be holding the hose onto the tin across to the turbo has disappeared. Now presumably, and this is what happens with vibration, it's just come undone and fallen off. It's probably somewhere out in the Simpson Desert by now. So we've actually got one vibration problem that started here that's affected it right the way back down the line. That's always the way it happens. With vibration, you find a loose problem, check the next thing, because chances are, as soon as this bit starts to work loose, the next thing down the line will too. Okay, so we better have a go at fixing this. First thing to do, in this case, because this has been rattling around a bit, it's taken up all the free play in the bolt. So the best way to fix it, and that's fairly simple, it's plumber's tape. Plumber's tape's great stuff, and it's not just plumbers who can use it, take advantage of it, I guess. A few turns of plumber's tape will take the slack out of the thread, okay? And by taking the slack out of the thread, it'll help us combat vibration. So we'll just tape that up, pop the finer filter back in. Note that this filter's done nearly 2,500 kilometres. There's very little Very little dirt on it so far, so we'll leave it for now and we'll change it later on if we need to. Not change it, re-oil it. They're terrific like that. I really do like these filters, they're good. Okay, on goes the little rubber sleeve. Now you see straight away that's holding that on its own just about. And then the wing nut back on over the top. As soon as it hits the tape, you can feel it starting to slow down because it's locking itself. That's nice, I like that. It's not too tight, it's not going to do any damage, but it's just going to hold it in place. Right, so we've taken the play out of that, all's hunky-dory. Next thing down the line, the hole in the rubber hose. What we're going to do there, I found an old inner tube, I've cut a square out of it. I'm going to wrap it around the damaged area, and then I'm going to rely on the bushman's favourite. Here it is. Duct tape. Here we go. I'll just wrap that around there a couple of times. Now when you use tape like this in a situation like this where you're trying to seal the dust out, obviously you've got to use a lot of it and spread well and truly wide of the actual damaged area itself. Now the reason I've put a bit of rubber in there isn't so much because the tape itself would seal up the hose. The reason I've put the rubber in there is to stop the hose moving around. It's the movement, the vibration, that's chopped into it on the side of the quarter panel here. So, that little bit of rubber should take up the spare room, and this tape will hold it in place and seal it up. Look at that, nice and tight, beautiful. Now, our next problem is this. This bolt, and you can see it's clogged its threads completely. That's because it's been sitting here vibrating, next thing in line. Vibration always travels down the line. It's been sitting there vibrating quite happily, and being a steel bolt in an aluminium casing, it's chewed out all the aluminium. That's it, you can see on the end of the bolt. So this is the sort of thing you've got to look for. That looks fine until you grab hold of it, and look at that. The bolt's not doing anything at all. And the next bolt down the line, sure enough, it's a bit loose too. The problem stops there, fortunately, in that there's a rubber sleeve over to the turbo, so that's not going to be a drama. But what we need to do now is replace this clamp that's gone missing. Quickest way to do that in the bush, when we don't have a 2.5 inch hose clamp lying around, is to do a Queensland hitch through a piece of rubber tube. Now, this rubber tube is just another bit of spare fuel line that happened to be floating around the back of the truck. There's plenty of it. And a Queensland hitch is the all-purpose wire tie that you can use to get yourself out of all sorts of trouble. And let's face it, wire is the bushman's friend. All you do to make a decent Queensland hitch is cut yourself a length of wire, just like this one, bend it in the middle, just like that, so that it's equidistant long. And in this case, I'm going to thread it down through this piece of fuel line, tuck that around like so, bring it up to about there, and that'll give me a purchase point. Now I've already taken another one of my spare 12 gauge welding rods and bent it up with the pliers to make this little handle. Now that's not necessary. You can use a screwdriver, a Phillips head or something like that, but it really makes a job like this easier. Now all I do then is thread that through the loop in the end of the wire and twist. And you can see that it's going to twist itself up nice and tight. And there it goes. The reason I've used the fuel line around there obviously is because wire on its own would just slice straight through that rubber. Now you don't want to put too much tension on it because obviously it's only wire and it's going to break. That's why I've used light gauge welding rod to make the handle, because it'll bend before it'll break the wire. I don't have a thread kit with me, so there's not a lot I can do about the thread into the aluminium. And anyway, that'll be a job for home. So what I'm going to do, I do happen to have a bunch of nuts and bolts lying around, as you should have in your toolkit. And I've found one that's smaller diameter. I'm going to pop it up from underneath the bottom there, I hope, if I can get my fingers in there. There it goes, righto. Now, what I've done is I've used a narrower bolt than the hole, okay? It's long. I've got to stick a couple of big washers on it to bring it up to speed. I've just got a little bit of nylon spacer or something. It looks like it came out of a skateboard that I found earlier on. Another washer, and I'll just screw that up. I'll get at that with a spanner in a minute, and that'll have sorted that out. And last thing I need to do is tighten this one up here, and we're away. Just remember, when you're in the bush, wire, tape, rubber hose, your best mates.
If there's one surprise that outback roads continually dish up, it's bulldust. We came across this big patch on the road between Windora and Junda. Bulldust is like talcum powder. It settles on the road and looks nice and flat, but underneath is often anything but. And therein lies the problem. Hidden under that fine dust can be rocks, holes, or just more bulldust. It has the tendency to throw a four-wheel drive around, and the more slowly you take it, the better chance you have of emerging damage-free.
The desert travellers soon find out, if they didn't understand, that in the outback, nature holds your very life in hand. The city folk see weather change, but out here, it's not the same, because there's dark threats in the sky of a fury close by when a sudden storm brings rain. The drovers of old knew well the fear of getting caught out alone. You can be struck dead by the lightning bolts or pelted by giant hailstones.
It was a day of extremes yesterday. We kicked off the day on the banks of the Cooper Creek, just outside Windora, and it was 40-degree plus heat. It stayed that way all the way through Junda and up past Stonehenge until it changed dramatically. We got a lightning storm, the likes of which I have never seen before in the outback. We camped the night in Longreach and stopped off at a little Indian restaurant which had some fantastic cuisine, better than any city restaurant that I've actually been to. It really was a great surprise. Now when you're in Longreach, a place that you really have to sample is right behind me, the Australian Stockman's Hall of Fame. It really is a must-see. Just outside of Longreach, we found more evidence of just how tough these country roads can be. One of the wheels of this road train trailer apparently got sucked into the mud on the verge of the road, and believe me, that mud is damn slippery. The driver did his best to control it, but with no traction, the trailer had a mind of its own and flipped over. After rain in this black soil country, the roads can really turn to slop. But it's not always that predictable. On this stretch of road out the back of Tambo, we were travelling along a well-formed gravel road, then suddenly, without notice, it turned to mud. In this situation, there's no use trying to turn around because chances are you'll just get bogged in the process. So we pressed on, trying hard to keep an even keel and correcting the forced slides caused by the mud. We're on our way out to Salvatore Rosa section of the Carnarvon National Park, and the road is as slippery as anything. I'm sort of all over the shop here. We don't want to stop, otherwise chances are we'll get bogged. I'm just sort of wrestling the wheel as we go. This is black soil country, ladies and gents, and it is very sloppy after rain. They've only had a few inches out here, but the whole thing has turned to slop. I'm in high range, I'm in second gear, and I've got the centre diff lock on for a bit of extra traction. This ensures that power is applied to at least one front and one rear wheel at all times. I could have engaged low range four-wheel drive, but mud can sometimes require momentum to get through, so high range it was. On country roads, particularly in wet conditions, make sure you abide by any road closure signs. These roads cost millions to upgrade and are vital to the local community, so the last thing you want to do is cut them up. Now we've just come through a particularly sticky, muddy section of road, so we thought it would be a good time to pull up and check out the condition of the tyres that both of these cars are running. Now Roothy's vehicle, his 40 series, is running a set of Cooper CTDs. Now they're actually a discontinued radial tyre, so you can't buy them anymore, but check out this tread, it is unbelievable. Choked full of mud, and basically this is getting no traction whatsoever. The 100 series tyre, however, is a new Cooper tyre, and it's actually called a Discoverer ST, and it's a slightly more aggressive tread, and as you can see, the self-cleaning abilities of this tyre are far better. You can see that there's some good gaps between the lugs, and this has got a nice square, reasonably aggressive sidewall, so when you're in that muddy terrain you'll get more turning ability and more purchase on the road.
There's nothing there. How wrong they are. Can't they see or understand how drops of rain make life explode all across this land?
We're at the Nagoa River camping area, which is the westernmost part of the park, and it's a terrific place, it really is. The Nagoa River itself, I'm standing here in the middle of it, is spring-fed water, and it's absolutely crystal clear, tastes fantastic. You can bet we'll be filling up all our water containers here. It's just lovely. You don't get it better out of a bottle any day. There's been a fire through here recently. It's all nicely greened up with a bit of rain. It's absolutely superb place to come to bring the family to have a bit of a camp. Not much in the way of facilities, just a single toilet up there, but that's fine. The reason that's fine is because unlike the eastern side of Carnarvon Gorge, where every man and his dog's been going for years and the camping grounds are always packed with buses and kids and all the rest of it, nobody ever comes over to the west side. The access track in alone proves that. I mean, it's not graded or anything, it's just a normal old track. And there's no one here, of course, at all. It's just the absolutely perfect place to come and camp, plenty of firewood, just a lovely place all round.
Well, we're parked smack in the middle of the Nagoa River here, and we thought it was a great time to take advantage of this fantastic clear water. Now the tank I've just filled up is a TJM 31 litre polyethylene tank. The filler, as you can see, is just here, and the tank itself is located just under here on the outside of the chassis rail. Now the great thing about having a tank located nice and low there is that it doesn't affect the centre of gravity of your vehicle, so the car will still handle pretty well. The other great feature about this tank is that it's got a nice little tap located at the back of it, so it's out of the way from flying rocks and stones, and you can have water at the flick of a tap when you're in the bush. On an expedition into the tropics in September of 1846, Lieutenant Colonel Sir Thomas Mitchell passed through this very valley, naming it Salvator Rosa. He camped not far from here and wrote, "It was a discovery worthy of the toils of a pilgrimage." I couldn't agree more, Thomas. And because this is a long way away from the maddening crowds of Carnarvon Gorge, I reckon this country wouldn't have changed a lot since the lieutenant first came through. The road has dried out somewhat on our way out of the park, but with plenty of wildlife and livestock on the roads, it pays to keep your wits about you. already on this trip we've unfortunately knocked over a couple of roos and an emu, but that really is a fact of life when you're travelling these outback dirt roads. You're bound to come into contact with wildlife or stock at some stage, which is why frontal protection is so important. What are you trying to protect? Basically the radiator. You can live without lights, but the radiator really is the heart and soul of your cooling system. Now, when you're selecting a bull bar, you really need to have a good look at the mounts, because without the mounts being properly mounted to your vehicle, it's really not going to do a great deal of protection. This Type 15 bar from TJM, it's a steel bar, and it actually has some superb mounts on it. On each side of the chassis rail, it's bolted with 6 high tensile bolts, so it's not going anywhere. Now, a little bit of extra protection is also afforded by these side bars. Not only do they protect the quarter panels when roos jump off the side of the road, as they often do, but it also adds a little bit of extra protection for this bar here. But basically, we recommend having a good set of frontal protection on any four-wheel drive when you're travelling these outback dirt roads, because it could save your life. We're at the back of the vehicle now, checking out the spare tyre carrier. Now, one of the biggest gripes we have at Four Wheel Drive Monthly magazine when we're testing these Land Cruiser 100 series is the location of the spare tyre. Usually it sits under the back of the vehicle. Now that has two problems. Firstly, it decreases your departure angle, and secondly, it's a hell of a hard thing to change when you're in muddy conditions. You've got to slide right under the vehicle and wind the spare out. Not a very pretty sight indeed. Now, the beauty of pulling the spare tyre out to the back of the vehicle means that obviously it's easily accessible if you need to change it, but it also opens up a lovely big void of space under the vehicle. Now, TJM have used that space and they've built a 170 litre sub-tank replacement. So basically now this Land Cruiser has got 265 litres of fuel on board, which gives it well over 1,000 kilometres of touring range. It really is a great innovation.
The road out the back of Springsure had seen its fair share of rain, but with a firm base underfoot, it was safe to proceed. We took it nice and slow through this section to check it out before getting some spectacular shots for the camera. After the rough and tumble of the Carnarvon National Park dirt tracks, I'm sure the cars were keen to see the smooth blacktop.
For in-car communications on this trip, we've been using these beaut little CB radios from Uniden. They're a UHF CB, set you back around $100 at your local communications store, and they're not a bad thing at all. They're good for line of sight communications, so don't rely on them in an emergency. And they run on 3 AA batteries, which will last you a good couple of days if you don't talk too often.
Western Queensland really has some fantastic small towns. Places like Springsure are not just spectacular, they're beautifully manicured too. You can see the town pride in every street and garden. We were keen to spend more time in these parts, but time constraints forced us to hit the road and head for the coastal hinterland.
So Roothy, you can't switch her off, mate. What's the problem?
Well, I can switch it off, but it means you guys have to push it. And I know how happy you feel about that. It's not a drama, really. It's I've got a charging problem of some sort. I don't know if it's the alternator or the regulator, or whether or not we've got a power leak somewhere.
But generally the old bus is going pretty well, isn't it?
Oh, it's flying along. I mean, it's fantastic. You know, we've lost a few basic functions. You know, the handbrake's full of mud and dust. It's not working anymore. What else? Not much, really, mate. I mean, you know,
A couple of fuses, that's
few
about
fuses, stuff like that. I mean, you expect that sort of thing when there's water trickling down over the open glass fuses, as has been the case the last couple of days. One of the problems with it, I think, the dual battery system means that there's so much power on board that it's kind of disguised the fault. I think the fault's probably developed very slowly throughout the trip, you know.
Right.
It sounded a little bit slower, and last night I noticed when we were roaring along, that the lights were just flickering on and off, but very slowly, you know.
Yeah.
So it's not a drama. We've got a spare alternator, but I was kind of thinking that, you know, you might sort of just push me.
Now that we'd fueled up, it was just a short trip to the ferry. You can have the choice of 3 separate step-off points onto Fraser Island, Rainbow Beach down south, Harvey Bay to the north, and River Heads. We took the ferry from River Heads, but whichever ferry you take, make sure you book beforehand. Fraser Island is Australians' version of a four-wheel drive mecca after all, and you're not the only one who's discovered that secret. Well, we're on the Fraser Venture right now, on the last leg of our journey, heading across to the beautiful Fraser Island. The weather has turned pretty average on us, but that's the story on these trips. Beautiful one day, pissing down the next. Once on the ferry, it's a good time to air down the tyres in preparation for the many miles of sand driving that lie ahead. With Milo's electrics playing up, we were forced to give the old bus an unorthodox push start. Try doing that with a plastic fantastic new four-wheel drive. Australia really is a land of contrasts. We kicked off our trip only 7 days ago on the edge of the dry, arid Simpson Desert. And now we're here on Fraser Island, driving up another sandy track, but this time it's under a rainforest canopy, and it really is spectacular. The weather wasn't too kind to us while at Lake McKenzie, but that didn't stop a few tourists from taking a dip. On a good day, the turquoise waters shimmer beautifully, and many a postcard picture has been taken here. Unique to Fraser Island, Lake McKenzie is a rare perched lake. It boasts some of the world's freshest water, as it's fed from pure rainwater, not springs or creeks. Near the Lake McKenzie car park, there are fireplaces, toilets and showers. However, camping is not allowed here anymore. If there's one component that takes a real battering when you've done a trip like we've just done, it's the suspension. Corrugations, rough, rocky, outback roads, even lumpy sand dunes, they all do their best to try and destroy the suspension of a four-wheel drive. Now, the interesting thing about shock absorbers is that they don't actually absorb any shock. That job is done by the springs and to a lesser extent the tyres. Probably a better way of describing a shock absorber is as a heat pump, because when it's controlling the action of the spring, it actually turns that into heat energy. Now, if we describe a shock absorber as a heat pump, this helps us understand why aftermarket shock absorbers really do well in the outback. Basically, they've got a bigger volume, so when they're asked to pump up and down extremely fast on extremely rough outback roads, they do a better job because they've got a greater cooling capacity. The Land Cruiser we drove on this trip is actually fitted with Series 2000 XGS shock absorbers, and they really do have that greater cooling capacity that you're after. They've also got a number of additional features that are worth mentioning. They've got double welded eyelets, they've also got polyurethane bushes, and the ones that we had fitted have got stone deflectors to protect your shock in that harsh Australian outback environment. Obviously, your shocks and springs need to work together. These Series 2000 heavy-duty springs do a few things that your normal coil springs don't. First of all, they increase the height of your vehicle, giving you better ground clearance. They also give you a far better ride, and they've certainly proven that on this trip. These coils are actually assisted by poly airbags. Now, poly airbags are fantastic in supporting the coil spring when you're heavily laden in the back of your vehicle. If there's one thing that we take pretty seriously here at 4 Wheel Drive Monthly magazine, it's keeping the beers cold. And you can't really do that with any confidence, powering your fridge that is, without having a dual battery system. This Land Cruiser here is fitted with an IBS dual battery system, and it's got a few really good features. The main feature, I guess with any dual battery system, is that you can actually isolate that second battery. So if you drain the auxiliary battery right down, you can actually still start the vehicle using your starter battery. Another great feature of this system is the LED display mounted inside the cabin. It monitors the charge rate of each battery. But probably the thing that I like most about this battery system is the solenoid that it has fitted. It enables you to override the whole system so that if you really need maximum power to kick the vehicle over in the morning or even do some heavy duty winching, you can do that by matching both batteries together. But speaking of beers, I think it's about time for one. The first time I came to Fraser Island, I didn't even get past Rainbow Beach. My old landy got stuck on some rocks on an incoming tide, and with no one prepared to risk their vehicle in the recovery, my poor old girl was a goner. That night, the king tide made minced meat of my Series 2A, ripping the body clean off the chassis. But since then, I've learned a thing or two about sand driving, which really can be one of the most enjoyable parts of four-wheel driving. There's nothing like the feeling of flying down a beach with the windows down and the wind in your hair. On hard sand, it can be like driving on a highway, but on soft sand, there are a few precautions you have to take. The first is tyre pressures. By lowering your tyre pressures to around 16 psi, you're increasing the tread pattern length. So rather than digging in and bogging your 4B, you'll float across the top of the sand. But once you've aired down, you need to slow down and reduce sudden steering movements. By turning sharply and at speed, you run the risk of rolling a tyre off the bead. Not a pretty sight, believe me. The very minimum recovery equipment needed on the sand is a shovel, a snatch strap, and a couple of rated D-shackles. When driving along the main beach at Fraser, make sure you keep an eye out for the creeks that run into the ocean. Some of these creeks, like Eli Creek, have sharp, steep banks, and if you tackle them too quickly, you risk doing some damage. These creeks can be impassable at high tide too, so check at the ranger station when it is safe to drive. But the real key to sand driving is momentum. Not 100 mph momentum, mind you, just keeping your speed high enough to float over the surface of the sand. Automatic transmissions can be an advantage here too, as the vehicle is less likely to bog down during gear changes, and you can concentrate on steering rather than shifting gears. Whether you select high or low range four-wheel drive will depend on how soft the sand is. When approaching oncoming vehicles along the beach, use your indicators to signal which side of the vehicle you wish to pass. If in doubt, stick to the left. If you're going to be sand driving on a regular basis, there's a couple of things you should have on board. A good quality tyre gauge is one, and an air compressor is another one. Now, you can go and get those $20 jobbies down at your local discount store, but they really aren't up to the task when it comes to big four-wheel drive tyres. Make sure you get a decent quality one, like this Big Red that we've been using on this trip. It really does work a treat.
I first came here in the 70s, the early 70s, with some mates in an old combi. And in those days, you were on your own. If you were here, there was no signs, very little direction. You really didn't know what was going on. We got bogged all over the place. It was fantastic. It was one of the best times I've ever had. But over the years, I've noticed, and you would have noticed this too, increasingly more and more places are closed off to four-wheel drive vehicles. They seem to want to shunt us down narrower paths all the time. Now, obviously there's a lot of reason for this because there are a lot more four-wheel drive vehicles around, and yes, we all need to look after the environment and things like that, but I think really as four-wheel drivers we probably appreciate and are more aware of the environment than a lot of other people. We like to get out there and enjoy it. We don't like to get out there and cut it up. Now, we know that. What worries me is that a lot of this sort of stuff, no vehicles beyond this point, is really an elitist sort of a philosophy. They want to cut us out. They really do. They want to keep us away. They want to preserve it. And who for? For themselves, really. Who are the people I'm talking about? Well, government officials, council officials, the scientists and researchers and people like that. They seem to have this innate belief that somehow people are going to ruin the environment, and that's not necessarily the case. When it comes to somewhere like Fraser or Stradbroke or Moreton, places like that, the sand miners have been through here, the loggers have been through here. Four-wheel driving really is about the least damaging thing that can ever happen on an island like this, even if there's thousands of us. And why do I say that? Because in the 30 years I've been coming here to Fraser Island and to all the other sand islands up and down the coast, if there's one thing I've noticed, and that is that Mother Nature can turn the whole place upside down tomorrow if it wants to. There's really no point saying regeneration area or don't go on the beach, because it might cause a little bit of damage today. The reality is, one big storm, a howling wind like this, and the whole place changes its face. That's how this island got here in the first place. Unfortunately, I have to admit this, it was blown up from New South Wales. And if you go to Noosa Beach, 20 years ago, I remember running the old combi up there too. These days, about 2 weeks ago, Noosa Beach disappeared. They're now pumping sand in. One storm changed the whole place of it, changed the whole face of it. Now, if I sound a little bit upset, it's because I am. I hate seeing signs like this. I really don't think it's fair, given the fact that we as four-wheel drivers, we're just average family guys. We want to take our families out, show them the environment, enjoy it, we clean up after ourselves, and then we go home. This sort of restriction is not good, but that doesn't save Fraser from being a beautiful place. It is such a superb place, and there is still so much four-wheel drive access. But from my point of view, and from yours, when it comes to protesting about potential closures, we need to do everything we can. Someone shuts up something or gates something near you, get onto the government, send them a letter, tell them you're not going to vote for whatever Wally's in charge. Do something about it. Don't sit there, because before long, we'll be paying to go everywhere and we'll be restricted, and that's just not on. It's our country too.
One of the most unusual pieces of recovery equipment you'll find in your four-wheel driver's kit bag is an Airbag Jack. Airbag Jacks, like this Ox brand name one from TJM, use the vehicle's exhaust gases to inflate the heavy-duty nylon bag. This lifts the vehicle right off the ground and is really handy in situations like sand and mud, where a conventional jack is not an option. The Ox kit comes with 2 protection mats to guard against punctures. In this case, we've deliberately bogged the vehicle quite deep in the sand, but with the Ox Airbag Jack hoisting the bogged wheels in the air, we were able to build up the sand underneath the tyres so the vehicle could be driven out. When using an Airbag Jack, we recommend that it is a 2-person operation, with one person at the exhaust pipe and the other making sure that the bag is inflating properly. Never place any part of your body under a vehicle that is suspended by an Airbag Jack. It really is only intended as a recovery device. The Maheno wreck is one bit of Fraser Island scenery that you can't miss. Built in 1905 in Scotland, the Maheno was a 5,300-tonne steamship that served its time out ferrying passengers and cargo around Australian ports. The old girl was retired in 1935 and sold to the Japanese, who wanted to tow her back to Japan for scrap metal. But on its way there, a winter cyclone got hold of the ship and blew it onto the beach, 4 k's north of Ely Creek. Yet despite being battered by Pacific Ocean swells for nearly 70 years now, the main structure still holds up remarkably well. Well, this marks the end of our journey from Big Red to the beach. I know that Roothy and I have certainly had a blast, and I hope you've enjoyed watching too. But remember, Australia is the best country in the world for four-wheel driving, so get out there and enjoy it yourself.
Australia really is the greatest place on earth. And I reckon the outback is the heart and soul of our country. There's nothing I love better than getting in Milo and driving off into the vast peace and quiet that you only get when you're right out in the bush. And the best thing is, it's just down the end of your street too. So come on, this is where you'll feel the true heartbeat of Australia. Come out here and have a look.